Hi, Principal Matters friends. This is Will Parker back with my co-host, Dr. Jen Schwanke, for another Principal Matters podcast. Jen, this week our guest is going to be Alli Phelps, a state teacher of the year, an assistant principal, just finished her doctoral work on principal well-being. I just can't wait for principals to listen to her research. But before we do that, we always start with our question of the week. And this one actually came through a Facebook message. So if you want to reach out to us through social media, you can do that. But this person said, I'm an assistant principal with 9 years of experience. I've made it to a superintendent interview to become principal of my school, K-8 with 900 students. My competition is a 20-year veteran principal. How can I compete with that? What advice do you have? And so I know this is only a 5-minute Q&A, Jen, but what are some things you would want to say to this listener?
I think this listener really needs to forget about the competition. That's what I think. It's a mind trick, but it can be done. And you just think, it doesn't matter who I'm competing with because all I can be is myself. All I can do is show them who I am. It reminds me of when I ran track in high school. I would get myself just bonkers thinking, am I going to run faster than Sharon Thompson? I'd look in the paper for her times and think, could I beat? None of that mattered. All I could do was go as fast as I could go on that day running the half-mile race, right? And so you kind of got to wipe out your competition and show who you are. And if they want that, you'll get the job. If they want your competitor, they will hire your competitor. And I know I'm boiling this down to an impossibility by saying, forget about it, but it really is the only way, right? Will, is that you're nodding a
Yeah.
lot. Tell me if you
Yeah.
agree.
No, that was my first thought too, was, okay, let's take the focus off the competition and let's put it on the end product, which are kids. What is it
Right.
that you are, and I would say this to anybody that's going into an interview. So just think about this for a minute. Take it off of yourself and ask, what is the most ideal outcome I would want for a student leaving the school when they're finished here? Make that your story. Make that your solutions. Make that your conversation. Make that your goal. Make that your focus, because nobody wants to hire a leader who's going to talk just about themselves or compare themselves to someone else. What they want is a leader who's going to be passionate about the outcomes of kids. And
Right.
so I'll also say this. I know when you start the comparison game, you're stepping right into that. I don't know, people like to call it the imposter syndrome or whatever it is, but you had some hard fought battles yourself to be in education this long, that you were most likely a teacher and now 9 years of experience as an AP. You're ready. You're ready. So just accept that and then focus on the kids.
You don't want to beat your competition. You want to win the job. And
Mhm.
those two things are actually very different.
Yeah, yeah. And then I'll add this last statement, Jen. You've heard me say this so many times. When I step into especially panel interviews, I always try to remind leaders, don't think of yourself as the candidate. Think of yourself as the consultant. You're here to help them solve a problem. And if you're the part of the solution, then they're going to ask you to join their team. But help them solve problems, and they're going to see you as like, oh, this is somebody I want on my team. Wow, Jen, how do we do in 5 minutes?
I think we did great. That's actually one of our better performances in staying within the 5 minutes.
Well,
Well done.
Principal Matters listeners, as you wrap up, I want to just give you a heads up that next week when you tune in, it's going to be our 500th episode, and we're going to have a panel of amazing listeners, principals, friends from across the nation be a part of that celebration with us. So until next time, I hope you love today's guest, because I know you will. But thanks for doing what matters. And Jen, how can our friends stay connected with you?
Yep, they can find me at jenschwanke.com, and there is a form to fill out if they want to send me an email.
Thanks, Jen. Let's take a moment to thank our sponsors, and then we'll be right back. Everyone talks about the power of data-driven instruction, but what does that actually look like? Look no further than iExcel, the ultimate online learning and teaching platform for K-12. iExcel gives you meaningful insights that drive real progress, and research can prove it. Studies in nearly all 50 states across the U.S. show that schools that use iExcel outperform other schools on state tests. Educators who use iExcel love that they can easily see how their schools are performing in real time to make better instructional decisions. And iExcel doesn't stop at just data. iExcel also brings an entire ecosystem of resources for your teachers with a complete curriculum, personalized learning plans, and so much more. It's no wonder that iExcel is used in 95 of the top 100 school districts. Ready to join them? Visit IXL.com/PM to get started.
You're listening to Principal Matters, the School Leaders Podcast.
Hi, friends. This is Will Parker, host of Principal Matters, the School Leaders Podcast, where each week we bring you inspiring, innovative, and imaginative ideas for your own school leadership. And this week, we're going to be talking about educator wellness with my special guest, Dr. Alli Phelps. Dr. Alli Phelps has spent more than 20 years dedicated to educator wellness, improving the lives of both teachers and students. Her expertise spans classroom teaching, EL instruction, advocacy, mentoring, coaching, and school administration. She began teaching English in Australia in 1999 and then returned to the U.S. to teach English and ESL at Homewood High School after completing her first master's in secondary English education. She later earned a second master's in ESL, which included cultural immersion work in Venezuela. In 2009, she moved to Shades Cahaba Elementary to teach K-5 EL students. In 2021, she was named the Alabama's Elementary Teacher of the Year. She went on to earn her P12 administrative certification and complete a doctorate at Samford University focused on educator wellness. And today she serves as assistant principal at River Chase Elementary in Hoover City Schools. Outside of work, she loves running, yoga, reading, time with her family and friends, and caring for her Great Dane rescue, Murphy. Dr. Alli Phelps, welcome to Principal Matters Podcast. Feel free to fill in the gaps in that intro and tell listeners something else they may be surprised to know about you.
Oh my gosh. Well, I'm so excited to be here, and I care deeply about this topic and this noble profession that we share. So it's wild hearing that bio. And yes, I've been in education since 1999. So I think something that is worth noting is that I am currently an assistant principal, but the bulk of my experience is in teaching. And up until 2 years ago, that was my full-time life and career. And I switched over to administration. And so I am constantly finding myself as the oldest one at the table and the one with the least experience. And surprisingly, I'm okay with that. I'm a learner. I'm a lifelong learner. It's always been a core tenet of my teaching philosophy and just my beliefs. And so I'm comfortable in this spot. And even though I didn't see myself in administration initially, but it's exactly where I'm supposed to be. I know that for sure, even though I couldn't ever have thought of that in years past. So that's me, and I have 2 adult children that still keep me busy, even though they're not at home with me. And I just love what I do. I do love this field and the work, and learning about best practices and talking about wellness. So I'm super excited to do that today.
Well, just so listeners have some context, you and I met in person in Alabama a year ago when I was doing some work. They had a series of assistant principal conferences across the state, and I can't remember actually which one I met you at, Alli. Do you remember where we were?
Oh, I very clearly remember. And yes, I don't think I mentioned that when I first started talking, but I have such deep gratitude for you, Will, and I'm so excited and honored that you asked me to talk today. But the first time I heard you speak was you were the keynote speaker at our class conference in Birmingham here, and you spoke about your book, and you spoke about wellness and taking care of ourselves. And I used the oldest person at the table and the one with the least experience. But prior to you getting up and talking, I literally was talking to, great big huge conference ballroom, and the people at my table, which were all younger than me, administrators, but had all had more experience. And I was telling them about my interest and they were asking me about my dissertation, and you started talking, and they all looked at me and they were like, oh my gosh, you've got to go talk to him. You've got to, oh, this is amazing. Cause they were so interested in what we care about, as well. So I, hightailed it up to the front and near the stage and, introduced myself. And I'm so glad I'm not shy about that because I'm so glad to know you and your work.
Well,
That's when we met.
yes, it was in Birmingham, and one of the reasons I was having a hard time remembering the city is that there are 3 that were hosted across the state. One of them in Mobile got canceled, and then the Birmingham one was still on, and then there was another one that was still open. But I ended up flying into Atlanta. It was snowing so badly I couldn't get a plane to the next place, so I had to rent a car. It was crazy. So by the time you saw me speaking that morning, it had been quite a ordeal to get to where I was,
Yeah.
because you guys don't get that kind of snow normally in that part of Alabama.
Right.
But most of my listeners know I have a book that I wrote back after COVID called Pause, Breathe, Flourish, Living Your Best Life as an Educator, which is all about my own journey through struggling with burnout, trying to figure out how to do this work sustainably, and the hard conversations I kept having with leaders who didn't want to just talk about practice. They also wanted to talk about, man, how do I do this so that I can still be authentically who I am, take care of my family? And that's why it's such a joy to bring you to this conversation, Alli, because not only was that something that you and I connected around that day at that conference, you were already doing research into this topic. You spent your entire dissertation research around this topic. You connected with people across the U.S. I introduced you to some of them, and you connected with them and with others to just gather in this information. So I wanted to give listeners the opportunity to have the privilege I've had with you, even off the recording, to just learn what you learned. So you finished your research in educator wellness. And when this comes out, by the way, we're going to be probably long past your receiving your degree, because this will be published or released in the spring of 26, but we're recording this at the end of 25. Can you take us through the process of your research and what was involved in gathering the data and feedback as you really wrestled with this idea of educator wellness?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, as you mentioned in, my bio, I was the teacher of the year for Alabama in 2021. And that really, I think that's, important to mention because I had my own struggles, with burnout, as you referenced your struggles, and just teaching through COVID and its challenges and personal issues, personal things. And so, through that teacher of the year process, all of a sudden I found myself, um, deeply loving my work, but also, um, close to burnout. And, those aren't mutually exclusive, but in my head, I was like, okay, now I'm going to be speaking across the state about this, and how did I get here, in that capacity? So, I knew when I started, my doctorate and my classes, I knew that was important to me because, I had found some strategies and some support along the way that, brought me back into what I loved, and then also brought me to administration. So initially, I was really thinking about teacher wellness because, as I mentioned, that was the bulk of my experience in education, and, I had personally, as a teacher, been affected by, strategies involving teacher wellness and things that I had been trying to do and had success with. But, the more I looked into it, the more I realized the significant gap in the research, around administrator wellness and administrative care. And that was significant to me because then I was an administrator. And, also just talking to so many of my colleagues and so many of my friends that as administrators were struggling, and, looking at the longevity of their careers and questioning, um, what I saw in the research to be true, there's a huge problem with administrators and educational leaders, and how to get from managing this career that we have chosen and many of us deeply love to the longevity of that going over time. And so I shifted my research from teacher wellness to administrator wellness and what can help. And thankfully, meeting Will and just, gosh, God wink, right place, right time. I don't know, but you put me in touch with all these amazing principals of the year and assistant principals of the year that I was able to interview for my research on administrator wellness. And it was important to me that I look at that. I look at, I label them as high performing, and that was how I kind of narrowed that sample, is looking at not only had they won the award, but they were still boots on the ground doing the hard work in schools. So I know from my experience of teacher of the year that a lot of people, as soon as they win, and this wasn't my path, and came to administration a couple years after that, but many of them, as soon as they win an award like that, I think they go on to different positions, whether it's central office or speaking circuits or that kind of thing. And I think for many award-winning administrators, it can be the same thing. So that was very important to me, to find people that were still in buildings doing the work, and that had won it recently. So within the last 3 years, and I was able to interview across the country these amazing leaders, and gathered that data and did a qualitative study looking at what routines and interventions they use to enhance their resiliency and really take care of themselves in this career. So I nerded out hard over this research, and they were amazing people. I'm so lucky I got to talk to them.
Well, I'll jump in here to say a couple of things, Alli. I probably said this to you the very first time we met, which was, when I wrote my book, it was based on both practice, but also experience, but also just viewing the work through the lens of my own experience, but also the experience of others that I knew who were trying to find sustainability in how hard this work is. But I have said out loud for years, man, I wish I knew somebody who actually had the research to show some data around this. And you did that. You spent your dissertation really digging into, let me talk to leaders in the field who are still doing the work, who have proven through their experiences that they've led their schools to high achievement, and yet they're human. And so how have they wrestled with this in their lives? And I'm going to go ahead and just say on the front end, because you've shared with me before, the three areas that you pull out from your research, because I want you to just dive into each of these in just a moment. But you've pointed out, 1, the importance of physical wellness, 2, the importance of strong boundaries, and 3, aligning your values with your work. So I want to just take each of those one at a time, because you finished your research here. So take us through some of those takeaways. What takeaways stood out to you as the most interesting and compelling among those 3 areas, or anything else that you would like to unpack?
Sure. Well, those were the 3 major themes that kept coming up. The most coded was the physical wellness piece, and specifically physical exercise and movement. So when I talk about physical wellness, I'm looking at nutrition and hydration, sleep, and movement and exercise. So the questions I asked really centered around those three. And for the majority of them, the movement piece was just critical to their wellness, and they felt like it enhanced their resiliency. It impacted their decision making, their ability to, in all areas, just perform better, be more high performing. So that was pretty expected. Actually, I didn't. That wasn't that surprising to me.
Mhm.
It's like one of those things that everybody says, well, you should drink more water. Um, but like seeing that they really put in the time, and made that a priority, which goes to the second theme, which would be strong boundaries. So
Mhm.
um, they were so disciplined and firm with their boundaries, especially when it comes to physical wellness, and also their personal time, their family time. One of my
Mhm.
favorite quotes from one of the participants was, "You have this job to support your family. You don't have this family to support your job." So that
Yeah.
idea of nurturing as a father, as a mother, as a sister, as a friend, um, even nurturing yourself, but really being very firm about that time away from work, and implementing different things to make sure faculty and staff is aware of that, respecting that time, as and also modeling that for others. So I am not going to I'm going to schedule send an email to you, if it can wait. I'm not going to call you because you're not going to call me if it's unless it's an emergency. I'm not going to send you text messages past whatever time. And I wouldn't expect you to send me text messages. So, all of those things that were strongly communicated and really well respected um, for themselves. And I've heard that before lots, that boundaries are really for ourselves and not for others, right? But hearing them open up so much about that and the firmness of that
Mhm.
was pretty interesting. And then the third theme was, of course, service and servant leadership and aligning values with work. And that probably didn't surprise me that much either, just because we are a service profession, and so many of us come into this field not for the money, and that's a common educator joke, I think. But um, as you move up, especially in administration, the face-to-face time with students, um, and being in classrooms reduces. And that's just a typical thing that happens. Um, but that can cause a distance. So, from the very thing that brought us to this field in the first place, right? So, these people that I was talking with, oh, again, they're just so amazing. Just really being intentional about articulating, connecting their daily work to those values, whether that was a gratitude practice of writing a positive note every day, community engagement, doing something service oriented, that maybe wasn't directly associated with the day-to-day school hours of work. Even going and sitting in classrooms, quite honestly, and asking, how can I help the teacher? Um, just really making that an intentional part of their to day. It was a self-renewing energy source for all of the administrators I talked to. And it really helped counteract that emotional fatigue, the compassion fatigue, the decision fatigue that so many administrators face. So that was that was really interesting to hear that.
What, today, Alli, I was enjoying coffee with a friend before you and I got on, and this is a former award-winning administrator who's just transitioned out of the profession and into another career area. And we were talking about, I asked him, I said, how are you doing now that you no longer have adrenaline running so high? And he just looked at me and said, I'm so glad you asked because I haven't been able to describe this, like what it feels like when you come down from, because in this career, and I'm just going to talk to leaders right now, any principal, managers, leaders, anyone who's in school leadership, recognize it's so hard to find someone else who understands the dynamics that are involved in a work that where you're just on and on and on. In some ways, you've been both a teacher of the year, you've now served as an administrator, and I know that your research is showing you the feedback from high achieving leaders who recognize that that level of commitment cannot happen. And so I'm repeating this for listeners. That level of commitment, there's no way it's sustainable if one, your own nutrition, hydration, movement, exercise is not committed to your own healthy condition. Two, that you've not set the boundaries where you can turn it off and be present with your family and pour into them and protect those boundaries for your people. So you're not asking them to also compromise all those values around their time commitments. And then three, not losing the belief in the why of this work, because you can have all the right systems and all the right commitments and all the right boundaries, but if you suddenly forget what brought you to this work, the values that are so important to you, the importance of reflecting and exercising gratitude and staying involved in your community and being service oriented in your work, then you run the risk of operating like a robot, not a human. And so I'm just curious, Alli, anything else you want to add to those takeaways? But I'm also curious for you as the researcher and the practitioner, because you're doing both. What were some aha moments for you, or other surprises or other takeaways that you walked away with from your research?
I think when you were talking about the humanity of, or I think you might have just said human, being human. I was so blessed to have these leaders really open up to me and be transparent. And I think they so deeply, like we are, and so many of your listeners, caring about this profession and want to help because they see the struggle. They see how easy it is to fall into toxic positivity and productivity, and I'm doing better if I'm pushing and working harder, and people are going to respect me more if they see how hard I'm working and how much I'm sacrificing. And the truth is that's not sustainable. I love that word, Will, that you were using. And so many of them were really honest about their struggles with huge weight loss, for example, with even food struggles, at times alcohol struggles, and that there is a humanity, that we are not robots here. But in order to achieve career longevity, and we all want to love what we do, but how do we get there with that? Because this job is not easy. But I do believe that implementing these strategies could be a way to start. And that the research, one of the statistics that I really looked hard at in my literature review is that nearly half of all principals are leaving the profession within their first 3 years of principalship. Wow. And that is just mind-blowing to me. Because if you want to be a principal, if that's your dream, And then within the first 3 years, you're walking away from that. And the research isn't really solid on like where they're going. So maybe they're moving up. Maybe they're doing something else in education, but still they're leaving what their goal was. And it's not great. And it's the same thing with teacher attrition. Like we don't really know why they're leaving, but it's a problem. And so that statistic is just staggering to me. And I would love to see you know, learning from the people that have been there, and like I said, they didn't start out this way. They had to learn over time and years of practice and trying to figure out what would work best for themselves. But those 3 themes were pretty major across the board.
I'm really curious too, Alli. Thank you for saying that. That statistic is so sobering, and I know it's not surprising to listeners of this show to recognize the turnover we see in teachers, new teachers. But when you think about that in terms of leadership, because even when I meet a superintendent who's made it past 5 years in a district, I'm like, congratulations, you just beat every statistical odd that's out there.
Right.
And so to think that a building itself, on average, is seeing a rotation of a different leader every 3 years is so sobering, because you and I both know that sustainable long-term growth happens best when communities can be built over time. And so when I
Absolutely.
talk to leaders that are in that first or second year, they're having a completely different experience than they're going to have in that fourth or fifth, or even that seventh, eighth, and ninth and 10th. And so that doesn't mean that everyone should be expected to stay within the constraints of whatever time period is expected. Everyone has their own journey. Every school has its own desires and needs. But those are just the hard realities of how different this profession is now compared to how it used to be traditionally. And so I'm just curious, you have such an interesting perspective because you spent so many years in the classroom before you stepped into admin, and because you had a year to travel a state representing teachers, interacting with educators, recognizing your own struggle with loving my work, but feeling like I'm burning out in my work. And now you've done a whole year of research around this issue. So I'm not asking you to be the smartest person in the room, but I do want to hear what Alli feels like Alli has learned through this, because you're very humble in saying, I'm the oldest person and the most experienced at the table. The truth is, to me, that's a definition, that humility is a definition of wisdom, that you recognize, man, I still have so much to learn. And, but even with that truth, Alli, tell us, what are some things now that as you're transitioning into this role as a leader, you've done this role as a teacher, what are some things you're holding on to from your experience and from this research that you're hoping that you're applying now, or that you're hoping to apply as you keep growing?
One of the main things that I guess I'm trying to talk about is that just to be honest about the struggle, because I think this work we do, it can't happen well in a silo, right? So I think the more I learn and the more questions I ask of people that have had different experiences, my research just really helped me. Just listening to struggles and successes and those themes with my own life. And it was interesting too, with my own life, they've helped me. I've really become more diligent with my, even like with my phone use. I mean, to be honest, and putting my phone on Do Not Disturb. But when I was finishing my interviews, they lasted, 45 to 60 minutes. But at the end of the interviews, I felt like many of the participants reported like they felt the same thing. So it was a reciprocal kind of thing. They were like, you've given, just for me talking about, because I'm not talking about myself at all, but they're telling me they're reminded of their own best practices and strategies and things that they want to implement. And, I feel like our school year calendar, the regular calendar, a lot of that goal setting and those reminders and those things that like we want to achieve, and that we know we should be doing with our health, and our time. A lot of that happens at the start of the school year and then again in January, right? So, for me to talk to them on a random Wednesday afternoon in the fall, they also said how that was helpful for them to just reflect. And so I think that conversation, I would love, for it to be more of a conversation. So every opportunity that I get to hopefully help by sharing this research and by talking about it, not only my own struggles, but saying what my participants have learned over their years of experience, I want to do, because I know how it's helped me, and from what they've told me, how that's helped them.
Wow, so many things I want to stop and just reflect on, Alli. And you know me, I summarize. So the power of being honest about the struggle, because it is real. But two, the importance of not struggling alone. And even today, when I was talking to my friend, we were talking about how, as leaders, there's nothing more helpful than suddenly being in a room with someone else who gets it, like understands what you're experiencing, because leadership can be very lonely. And so being willing to connect with other leaders that are like, I'm living this too. 3, being more mindful of my own practices, that even small things like the use of my phone, or how often I'm just putting everything down and giving someone undivided attention, or the last time that I've just been mindful and great and thankful for the good things that have happened through my day. Or I'm going to say this to listeners too: permission to reset. You and I are recording this several months before it's going to come out, and when it does get released, it's going to be close to the end of another school year. Folks are going to be looking towards summer. And, I do a lot of goal setting at the end of a calendar year, but we all know we work by school calendars. So summer's a really good time also to just take a step back and reset and think about those things that are going to help you stay healthy. So Principal Managed listeners, when you think about your wellness, your boundaries, your values, giving yourself permission. So I'm just going to do a quick shout out for any listeners too. There are lots of ways you can connect with other people to walk through this besides just listening to a podcast. Your state associations often have wonderful groups of leaders that get together regularly in regions or through Zoom meetings. Your national principals associations often offer those opportunities through conferences, workshops, or online options. I have groups that meet with me regularly through masterminds or through coaching. You can reach out to leaders like Alli and say, hey, I loved this conversation in your research. How can we connect and grow together? And so I'm just saying that because sometimes it's easy to listen to something like this and then walk away feeling either overwhelmed or not sure what that next thing is. And so I always like to just remind leaders, when I step away from a conversation like this, what's one thing that I can do that's going to make a difference towards moving towards that next growth area? Because the goal is not perfection. The goal is growth. Anything you want to add to that, Alli?
Oh my gosh. Yes. Like, absolutely. I just, I hear teachers sometimes say it's one more thing. And, nothing's more important than our time and our energy, right? But I know the overwhelm and the stress that, yes, you're right, these conversations can absolutely have. I think that's brilliant, Will, to say, like, what's one takeaway? What's one thing? I had talked with an expert on educator wellness, Dr. Tina Bogren. She's amazing. And I had been to a conference in Iowa not last summer, summer before. And I asked her, I said, okay, what's the one thing from physical wellness that if everything else is just too hard to do, what do you think is the priority? Because so often that's the first thing to go out the window, right? And we know it's the base of Maslow's hierarchy, and we get the foundational needs that we have. We know all that, but we sometimes set them aside so that we can stay up late working on something. But she said sleep. She said sleep as far as that aspect of physical wellness. So that's so important. I think when I asked her, I was sort of maybe feeling overwhelmed too, and was like, okay, if I just got one thing, what should my one thing be? And I would also say that at different parts of the year, I try to focus on a different aspect of wellness, but then I make like goals for the year. And as you said, this podcast, I think that it's going to be coming out at like such a great time to have that reflection over the summer. And not only for yourself, but for the teachers and the faculty and staff that you work with, to encourage them that way too.
There are some reflective practices that I share in my book, Whose Permission Are You Waiting For? An Educator's Guide to Doing What You Love. And I don't share them because they're unique. I share them because what I have, and I know you know this too, Alli, experienced is that it's not the tool, but it's actually the action of reflecting that gives me the opportunity to. You've got a copy of the book that you're showing me right now, but it's the action of reflecting that often gives me that perspective that I need to do the reset. And so obviously, Principal Mentors listeners, if you want to check out some of the resources in the book, you can. I've also shared those same reflective practices on posts and other places on my podcast. But Alli, as we wrap up, I just want to make sure we do two things as we leave this conversation. One, I want listeners to know how they can stay connected with you. And also, if they want to have any feedback from you, we'll put as much in the summary with this podcast on my website at williamdparker.com. But other people may want to reach out to you for copies of your research or information. And then finally, just any parting words that you would want to make sure to leave with listeners as we wrap up today's talk.
Yeah. Well, I guess I don't really have a great way to connect with me other than my email and my, I'm happy to give you my Instagram and connect that way. I'm certainly not a huge social media person, but that may actually be a good way to connect. I don't know. But I would love to connect. So, yes, I would love to share my email in the summary notes. And I think, one of the biggest things is don't light yourself on fire trying to keep everybody else warm is, I think, what I would say. Because it's so important that you take care of yourself. And by looking at some of the things we've talked about today and being intentional about those things for yourself. And I want to say being a little selfish about it, because if you don't, then we know what's likely to happen. So in order to be your best self and live well and really live your best, very best life, I think you have to reflect and be intentional that way.
Oh, that's so good. Alli, most of my listeners know that my faith is really important to me. And as I've been reading a lot of the stories from the Gospels this year, to me, there's no greater example of someone who was self-sacrificing than Jesus. And yet there's so many times in the stories of Scripture where he goes away alone. He finds a hiding place. He's on a mountain. And I've just thought about, wow, you can't find a stronger model of self-sacrifice, but also what a great model of, let me set the boundaries where I can refill so that I can then go serve. And so what I hear you saying is that we often mistake the giving and the serving and the loving and caring for others as a reason to not do that for ourselves.
Yeah.
And if we don't take time, and I know I'm preaching to the choir, but I'm going to say it again, we don't take time for that physical wellness and those strong boundaries and keeping our values aligned with our work, then we're running the risk of what you said, which is catching ourselves on fire in the attempt to warm others, or sometimes we call that smothering ourselves or not breathing enough or whatever. We can use all the analogies that we want. I use the analogy on the airplane of not putting on the mask. You don't put it on yourself first. You put it on yourself first, or you won't have the oxygen to put it on someone else. Alli, we will put a link to, in the show notes, we'll put your email address and Principal Matters. You can check out the show notes at williamdparker.com. But Alli, thank you so much for your research, but also for your leadership. You are an educator, an award-winning educator who's now really pouring into helping other leaders be sustainable in their work too. So thank you for all the work that you're doing. Thank you for letting us learn from you. And Principal Matters listeners, thank you for doing what matters. And we'll talk to you again soon. Thank you for listening to today's episode of Principal Matters, the School Leaders Podcast. If you enjoyed the show, would you take a moment and like, share, subscribe, or leave us a review? In fact, if you share it out with a friend, even more people can become a part of these conversations. Sign up for our newsletter at williamdparker.com for even more free resources. And don't forget to check out our website to learn more about our books, professional development offerings, Grow Academies, masterminds, executive coaching, and keynote presentations. Wow, let's keep learning together. And thank you for doing what matters.
Principal Matters.